Hello and welcome to the big picture. US-backed forces have said that they have taken full control of Raqqa from the Islamic State group, defeating the last jihadist holdouts in the de facto Syrian capital of their now shattered caliphate. The Kurdish Arab Syrian Democratic Forces, who've been fighting inside the northern cities since they broke in on the 6th of June, flushed the few hundreds of IS fighters left in the city from their last positions in the main hospital and the national stadium. Now, little is of the caliphate declared in 2014, which once ruled most of western Iraq and eastern Syria. So is this the beginning of the end for West Asian terrorism? Joining us today on the show, we've got Mr. Pinak Ranjan Chakravarty, Distinguished Fellow of the ORF and former Secretary of the MEA. We also have Dr. Awwad, West Asia expert, joining us here in the studio. And we also have Professor A.K. Pasha from the Center of West Asian Studies at JNU. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me here on the big picture. We'll talk about, of course, the implications. We'll talk about the larger picture in a bit. But first of all, I'd like to get an assessment from the three of you on what you feel is the situation on the ground at the moment. As far as the US-backed forces saying they have the control of Raqqa, how do you assess the situation, Mr. Chakravarty?
Well, they probably have almost 90–95% control. There would be some holdouts still. But by now, these mopping up operations would have taken care of those guys, or they would have fled to other parts. I believe there is a place called Mardan where some elements have already fled, and they will try to get a foothold there. But the fact is that perhaps we are seeing the territorial demise of the ISIS. But are we seeing the total demise of the ISIS? My answer would be no, that they will crop up here and there through other areas. But I think the kind of caliphate and the territorial apparatus and the taxing apparatus that they had created in this so-called caliphate, which was almost the size of Jordan in terms of its territory, that I think has come to an end. But what it means for the future of Syria, what it means for the future of that whole region is, of course, still an open question. There are other aspects to this that are there and which are very worrying. All
right. Dr. Awwad, how are you assessing the situation?
Well, I think the United States have created this mess in the Middle East. They have done it in Afghanistan. When they have gone there, they created Al-Qaeda, and they have succeeded in their project in defeating the Soviet Union at that time. And they have carried the same project into Syria and Iraq because they wanted to disintegrate this part of the world. So therefore, when they have created the SDF forces inside of Syria, knowingly that their future disintegration depend on the Kurdish issue. And that's why they created these forces. Majority of them are from the Kurd, whose leaders leading the fight against IS. And they tried with the Free Syrian Army, they tried with the other groups, but they failed. So this become a force to reckon with, where the United States have fully supported them, involved in the fight against the terrorists. In fact, there was a total bombing for the last 1 month, just total destruction of the city. We have lost more than 1,800 Syrian civilians by the American forces bombardment. The city become into rubble like they have done in Mosul. Yes. So the basic question is here really, we really defeated Daesh? Was there that much of noises to say that really that IS has been defeated? Or the ideology remain? As long as the ideology remain and sleeping cells are there, and all these terrorists, the mercenaries that we have come to across from the Soviet, from the Russian intelligence, they're saying that the American have siphoned them into the Russian Federation provinces where they have been coming mercenaries, or into the northern frontier of Pakistan, or into Afghanistan, or into Yemen. It's a clear indication that you created the project, yes, you created the crisis, now you wanted to manage the crisis. You are not willing to finish this crisis totally. This is one point. The second major point is that these forces will be shifted to somewhere else, because the South and Southeast Asia is the main concern, not the Arab world, because neither they can survive in Syria nor they can survive in Iraq, because it's a heterogeneous society. So the basic objective was to disintegrate, to break up the cities. But the future fighting for a new battle zone is yet to come, and it will be coming very soon.
All right. Professor Pasha, do you agree with that assessment? Do you think that, that victory that, of course, the US-backed forces are claiming in Raqqa, maybe at the moment, but it's very premature to say that, the entire area is seemingly under their control?
Yes, it is a major development in my perception, defeating the IS in Raqqa. But for quite some time, the backbone of the caliphate was broken when they were expelled from Mosul and the remaining parts of the Iraqi branch of the Islamic State. But the question now is whether the Islamic State has disappeared in Syria. It remains to be seen, because there are 3-4 contradictions which might emerge. One is the Syrian Kurds have played a vital role in expelling the Islamic State from Raqqa, and they have been reorganizing on the Turkish border.
That's right.
And Turkey has intervened in Idlib, and it claims many of the positions which it has been aspiring for quite some time. This is one aspect. The second one is the Syrian government forces are also pushing towards these areas which are claimed to be liberated from the Islamic State, Dar ez-Zor, and they have crossed the Euphrates. So the Russians are also backing the Syrian government forces. So the next expected clash would be between these SDF, Syrian Kurds, and the Syrian government forces. And the third one is the involvement of the Hezbollah from the Lebanese side on behalf of the Syrian government forces, and backed by the Iranian militias or trained militias. There the Israelis are opposing any extension of the Iranian influence near the Golan Heights. So you have this triangular involvement which would give the IS forces to disperse, because you have proliferation of weapons from all sides. The Americans, the Russians, the Kurds, everybody have been provided with multiple weapons, some heavy weapons also. So these weapons have now got scattered. And it's the Afghan scenario which comes to my mind.
Yes.
The Americans defeated the Taliban, but you have still the Taliban surviving, the Al-Qaeda in one shape or the other. So like that, the environment there in Syria is now so fragile. It is not in complete control of one party. So these elements would try to resurface. We have seen how the Al-Shabaab in Somalia have devastated the capital.
Absolutely.
Like that, Afghanistan just yesterday. So like that, these kind of activities this Islamic State will try to do not only in Syria, but also in Turkey and Iraq and other places.
All right. So the worry now, is like Dr. Awwad is in fact pointing out, you've displacing them, sending them to certain areas. In fact, there is a deal where a total of, at least the reports are claiming that 275 Syrian IS fighters' relatives, they surrendered to the SDF, and it's unclear, of course, where that safe passage would be given. What is the indication? What do you feel is going to be the next step, at least on that front? Decimating the IS altogether as an ideology, of course, seems far from it. But at least as far as the fighters are concerned, where do you feel this is heading?
You think for that, to understand that, one will have to look at the geopolitical objectives of all the parties, I would say, involved in this Syria, in this area. To an extent, I think you are seeing a proxy war between Russia, Iran, and the US. I think I would say Russia, Iran, Syria, and the US and its allies on the other side, in which I would include Israel as well. So to some extent, I think the ISIS factor is going to be kept alive in some form or the other.
Okay.
Because now you have the Americans allied with the Kurds to fight the ISIS, and then of course the Syrian national forces were fighting the ISIS. Then they also the so-called they supported the opposition to the Assad government forces, with the Americans were they were also fighting the ISIS. So ultimately, all these people were started fighting the ISIS, but the contradictions among them remain. And so I feel that the game is not yet over, because many of the foreign fighters that were in the ISIS, either they have been killed or they have been driven out, and they will seek refuge, I suppose, either in their own countries or in some other country where they have ISIS cells. And I think if you look at the fact that there are organizations owing allegiance to the ISIS in almost the whole of North Africa, all the countries, Libya, Egypt, in Sinai, and then, of course, and then the support that some of the ISIS and other groups have received, the anti-governmental groups have received from the Gulf Arabs, for example. So those things are, so what I'm saying is that the geopolitical aspects or objectives of all these groups have not disappeared.
Yes.
So some may be weakened, some may be overwhelmed, have been overwhelmed by for the time being. But I think the Americans, for example, are not going to give up on the fact that they have actually failed in their objective in Syria, which was primarily to remove the government of President Assad. So that friction remains. So those kind of and they are smarting from the fact that they have been actually outmaneuvered to some extent by the Russians.
Okay. As far as just talking about the ISIS, Dr. Awwad, give us a sense of how it has been, compared to 2014, where, as far as the troops are concerned, as far as the morale is concerned, financially, as far as the weapons are concerned, they were at the high at that time. But we did see several reports coming in that through the years, especially this particular year, we've seen a low down of sorts, at least as far as even the morale of the troops are concerned, of the ISIS. But do you see a bounce back of sorts that we saw perhaps in 2008, 2009? We did see, them vanish to some extent, and then they suddenly came out emerging so strong. Do you see that happening again, a bounce back of sorts?
Let me give you a little chronology of the problem. When it started, they have come from Turabura, from Afghanistan. They have been from Al-Qaeda. They affiliated of Al-Qaeda. They went to Iraq, and they were actually jailed by the American troops inside Boko Haram, camps, and Nama camp, and inside Abu Ghraib. The 23 of the founding of the IS were jailed by the United States, including Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, which the American acknowledged that they have been in jail for 4 years. So you see the project. You look at it from those angles. Let us be realistic in our discussion of the geopolitics important. United States went to Afghanistan not to defeat Al-Qaeda. No, never, because they are still in Afghanistan. They didn't go to Iraq to defeat Al-Qaeda. They are still in Iraq and in Syria. And now they are in Syria and in Iraq, and they have gone for the reason they wanted to defeat terrorism, but they never wanted to defeat terrorism really, or stop the civil war as they have been claiming. In fact, they have fueled and incited them. So this group have been gathering there. They have had sympathizers within the society, which have felt that they've been affiliated away from the mainstream people, and they were afraid of, because of the majority Shia in Iraq government with al-Maliki, that he was causing malpractice against the minority. All that fear was created among them. So IS had a very good hubs to grow and expand, and the expansion was very fast because it was a self-reliance they have created, where they were stealing the oil, siphoning it to Turkey, from Turkey going to Israel, from Israel going to Jordan, Jordan to Dubai come back the money to them, including the artifact, including the ransom. So all these finances were at the eyes of the international community. Everybody was seeing, but everybody was selling them arms, and they immune them to the top of their neck, and they trained them, and they opened the border. So state-sponsored terrorism was very much existing, and Turkey have opened the border of 950 kilometers with Syria for a training, for infrastructure. Everything was allowed. And then Turkey, at the end of the crisis, realized that they have been taken for a ride, where the Kurd now issue is taking their backbone. And that's why they have stepped and begged the Russian and the Iranian that, look, Erdogan is saying now my country is at risk, so help me out. So when they stopped this infrastructure for them, and they seized the arms smuggling into Syria and the mercenaries, they took on them. And the United States have decided, when they have created military bases, by the way, they created military bases in Syria illegally, they created military bases in Iraq legally, and the United States now will allow the growing of disintegration of Syria into a northern part of the Kurd, where the Turkish have felt the heat of it. So that's why they are on the run. Otherwise, if you follow the reports, the American troops were next to the IS last week, standing together hand by hand, and they were siphoning them. And even the Russian television was showing that these are the American, what they were doing next to the IS. So we have to understand that this group of mercenaries, rascals, killers, were trained by the most sophisticated agency in the world, and they allowed to lead a mass of ignorant under the name of Islam. So those people who were supporting them at the beginning realized that this savage have nothing to do with Islam. So they have immediately disowned them, and they allow them to go and allow them to also expel them from the country. So that
so what we're saying is, as far as these countries, as far as the US, as far as even Russia have strategic interests in this particular region, maybe they may say that an IS has been defeated, but a villain is always going to be around. There is always going to be a name that they're going to associate with, that they're going to be fighting with. And when we say, is this the beginning of the end of terror in West Asia, we're far from it. Do you agree?
You see, any crisis in any area doesn't emerge in a vacuum. You know, the fact of the matter was that after the Americans invaded Iraq, there was this fear among the Sunnis that the system now in Baghdad is dominated by the Shias. And the Sunnis, who were at the helm of affairs during Saddam Hussein, they felt elbowed out, sidelined. In the Anbar province, in Fallujah, in much of Mosul and western Iraq. So the old officers who were with the Ba'athist government, you know, they regrouped, and that is how the emergence of IS took place.
Okay.
So, but that resentment still continues, because Mosul was liberated largely because of the army which Sunnis believe is dominated by the Shias and the Iranian militias and other Iraqi Shia militias. So this basic root cause of why and how the IS emerged in both Syria and Iraq still remains on ground. So the tribes, disaffected tribes in both the regions, you know, unless their grievances are redressed and the promises which were made by both the regimes are not fulfilled, you know, this will remain a fertile ground for outside powers to arm and use them one against the other. And the Syrian Kurds and the Iraqi Kurds would be willing to play the game, whether by the Americans or Israelis or even by the Russians. Russians are going to support the Syrian regime against the Syrian Kurds, because they want to have an autonomy as the Iraqi Kurds have. So it is going to be a fight from the control of the territory which Syrian President Assad is unable to extend without external support. So Russia is going to be there for the foreseeable future.
Yes.
Iran also, because of the Saudi factor and American renewed threat of sanctions on Iran, is going to take interest so that Israel would not be a factor in any forcible attack on the nuclear plants or even on its military capability. So all these actors are jockeying and repositioning themselves in the leftover territory of the Islamic State. But the backbone of the Islamic State was broken by themselves because of their wrong policies which alienated much of the Sunnis. Because of the hardline position, extremist position, very harsh punishment was meted out even for observing Muslims. You know, if they don't grow beards, if they don't cover with their hijab, and ruinous taxes, and you know, all sorts of wrong things they did, which they claimed in the name of Islam, which they did not expect.
Yes.
So the Islamic State itself alienated from much of the supporters, and when they lost Mosul, the rich areas, oil and so on and so forth, you know, it was foreseen, and the 32-nation US-led coalition was working systematically to get rid of these forces, and that's how a combination of both, and also the Cold War between Qatar and Saudi Arabia and UAE, and the Iranian-Saudi Cold War also led to the debacle of the Islamic State.
All right, Dr. Awwad,
I think as long as the ideology of IS remain to be seen in the world, there will be no defeat for them. Actually, what happened when you're having the Muslim Brotherhood organization and the Wahhabism movement, which have really funded all over the world, you can see most of these places have been funded by the Saudi and the Qataris, money pumped into them to create those kind of a sleeping cell, to create havoc within the society. So as long as you see that Daesh is teaching from the curriculum of Saudi books then we are in trouble. Therefore, we have to defeat the ideology and address the matter of who those countries supporting terrorists, and they become a scapegoat, and they are not allowed even to be addressed by any international community that you have been sponsoring terrorists on the ground.
So basically, yes.
No, what I want to say that let us not see this completely through the prism of a Shia-Sunni kind of a conflict. I think there are larger geopolitical and geostrategic objectives being pursued by all these countries. And let me also emphasize that there are no innocents. No side is innocent in this conflict. Everybody has done atrocities. Everybody has done, they played the same game of pitting one against the other and things like that. And that is why I said that there is some kind of a proxy war going on here. The other factor that I must emphasize is that, in the eyes of America and Israel particularly, this is the Arabs fighting among themselves. And in this whole region, and when I say Arabs, I also mean the Muslims, fighting among themselves is a jolly good thing for them, because it keeps them busy. They don't feel the heat at all on various issues like the Palestinian issue, for example. The Palestinian issue seems to have been just docked off the perch, and nobody is particularly concerned about it. And today, the geopolitical contest between Iran and Saudi Arabia has reached such an extent that today Israel, Qatar, Saudi Arabia and UAE are actually working in tandem. So, from where and how this has happened, this is a remarkable development. And I think the bottom line really is that Israel is supporting also some of these groups, so that they keep fighting, and then keeps them busy. And Israel feels that, okay, as long as they keep busy, they won't bother us. So that is also part of the calculus here.
All right. So that's, of course, where West Asia is headed at the moment. And it's, of course, despite the victory that is being pointed out, that by the US-backed forces at the moment, things, of course, not looking as hopeful, at least as yet, for the region there. But just talking about the ISIS, Dr. Awwad, where is the next zone going to be? Is South Asia going to be the next target? Is that a region that everyone should be worried about? The countries here, should we be worried about these fringe elements, somehow making its way into our countries here?
Absolutely. See, the sole beneficiary of the IS being expanding anywhere in the world is the arm industry and Israel. And Israel is already increasing its hegemony in the region. That's why they wanted to see this part of the world disintegrated into different parts, and they can claim to be a Jewish state among the extremism nations surrounding the Israel. That's one of the objectives. The second objective is that, you see, when you start manufacturing weapons, you look for more battle zones. And battle zones will be made in Boko Haram, could be in Somalia, with the Al-Shabaab, could be on Philippines, could be in Afghanistan again, because they are already there, or in Pakistan, where we know that there are northern frontier have already received 1,000 of the Daesh mercenaries have reached already by the American jet flights. They have already siphoned them there. So if that is the objective, then we have to get worried, because the main objective of Daesh is the Muslim population, which is more in the South and Southeast Asia. You have 1 billion people, while in the Arab world we don't have, including those northern part, not even a 500 million. So the target is this part of the world, and I think that expansion will take place into this place. As long as there are sleeping cells and there are trained terrorists who are already infiltrated, and those returning, by the way, any country which had more than 100 of their mercenaries have fought in Syria and survived in Syria and Iraq and went back home, it's a big trouble for those countries, including the European and the American as well. All
right. We'll have to leave it there for the moment. Thank you, gentlemen.
One small point, the Syrian civil war and the Islamic State presence there saw Chechens, Uyghurs and many others. Where did they go? And they have all been safely transported to a safe place, and they will go back and create mayhem in Russia, in China and other places, including on our borders with Bangladesh
the US
and
will
Burma.
Unleash them elsewhere.
Right.
So they are being relocated, and new areas of terror and violence would emerge.
Business as usual.
But the whole idea of the caliphate, that still remains, and that is still alive, despite the ISIS, of course.
You can have mini caliphates like they have in Libya.
I think what has happened is that the caliphate as a historical object, goal, etc., a kind of longing for an old sort of a golden age, etc., will remain, like in all historical narratives. But to talk of a caliphate in the 21st century obviously is not going to work, and you know, in a globalized world of nation states, it's not going to work.
I think it's a fight between secularism and extremism. That will continue for some time to come. More terrorism and more of extremism there anywhere in the world now. In the name of terrorism, everybody will be fighting each other.
Yeah, what I'm more worried about is the fact that these people will be used for geopolitical objectives.
Absolutely.
Geostrategic.
And that wouldn't be the first
against Russia, against China, against India, against Pakistan, against Afghanistan, and everybody.
So, terrorism being used as a political tool to achieve a political objective.
Yes.
And without territory, caliphate has no meaning.
All right. We have to leave it there for the moment. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me on The Big Picture here. That's all we have time for the moment. Do join us again tomorrow for another topic. Thank you.